Hey, welcome to the Healthful Woman Podcast, the fastest growing podcast in women's health. Today's Monday, November 11th, 2024. My guest today and next week is Gabrielle Moskovitz. Gabrielle is a therapist who specializes in maternal mental health. Today, you're going to get to meet her, learn a little bit about who she is, and she's also going to tell the first part of her birth story. Next week, Gabrielle is going to return to tell the rest of her birth story, as well as how her own experiences have impacted her professional life as a therapist. Great stuff. All right, few reminders. The Unexpected, which is the book I wrote with Emily Astor, is available wherever you buy books. Second, please continue to send us any questions you have for our mailbag podcast. Please remember, these are for the mailbag podcast, not for your personal medical advice that you need to answer quickly. If you have that, please ask your doctor. All right, thanks for listening. See y'all next week.
Welcome to today's episode of Healthful Woman, a podcast designed to explore topics in women's health at all stages of life. I'm your host, Dr. Nathan Fox, an OBGYN and maternal fetal medicine specialist practicing in New York City. At Healthful Woman, I speak with leaders in the field to help you learn more about women's health, pregnancy, and wellness. Hey, Gabrielle, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be on this podcast.
No, buttering me up at the beginning. I love that.
You know me. I'm your biggest fan.
This has been a long time coming. We've been talking about this for a while, I feel. So this is terrific. Thank you for doing it. I really appreciate it. And I know it's going to be awesome. How are you? How are the kids?
The kids are psychotic as usual. Three boys under 5 and under. It's always fun in my house. But thank God, everyone's good. Everyone's good. We're slowly getting through the summer. All good. All good. Can't complain.
Amazing. So you volunteered to sort of tell your story and also weave in your professional life into this, which is cool. So just for our listeners, let's just what is your professional life? Like, what do you do?
Sure. So I'm a therapist at a private practice in Bergen County. We're called Collaborative Mind Psychotherapy. And I specifically work with maternal mental health. So it's like moms or people trying to be moms and all kinds of women's issues like infertility, pregnancy loss, just like motherhood stressors, even like menopause and all that kind of stuff. So anything related to moms or trying to be a mom. And I'm super passionate about it just because of my own journey in motherhood.
Yeah. Did you have any, going into your career, did you have any expectation that that's where you would land?
Absolutely not, to be honest. I actually chose this career later in life, and I could blame my husband for that. And hopefully he'll listen to the podcast. But he went.
Why wouldn't he? You think he's not going to listen to this podcast? He better.
He will.
Jake, here we're looking at you.
Exactly. He went to medical school in Israel, so some of my career stuff was kind of put on hold for those 4 years. And it was an awesome experience. We had a great time, but I didn't want to do anything graduate school in Israel so that it might not transfer over here. But I always had an interest in psychology. I didn't even know that maternal mental health was a thing until I was personally going through all of these stressors in my own life. And there was just no resources for women. And so I felt like I needed to do something and to sort of specialize in that so that I could help other women like myself.
Well, so are you saying that you were already interested in psychology and then this shifted you into that part of therapy? Or were you sort of not at all sure what you were going to do and said, I'm going to do training so I could become specifically a maternal mental health specialist?
So it was the first one, actually. I've always been interested in psychology. I come from, my mom's a school psychologist. I have a brother with mental illness. I've just always grown up around it. But I always actually thought I would work with children. I always liked working with children or adolescents. And then through my own experiences, I shifted into the maternal mental health field.
Love it. And you have to explain to our listeners, because you were trying to explain to me over text, your handle on Instagram.
Sure. So my handle is @thechefTherapist. In addition to being a therapist, I love to bake. I love to cook. So sometimes I'll throw in recipes in my therapy Instagram. I actually used to sell baked goods when I lived in the city. So just something I've always enjoyed doing. And it's sort of like my own therapy because I feel like it distracts my mind. And when I'm feeling anxious or I just need something, I'll like just whip up a cake or challah or something just to like distract myself. So I find it a really good coping skill. So I sort of like weave in the two in my Instagram account.
Wow. So you're talking the chef therapist, food, cooking, baking, and therapy.
Correct.
Love it. One-stop shopping.
Exactly.
For all your comfort needs. All right. So great intro. So let's start with you. Where are you coming into your first pregnancy? Where are you in life? Where you guys live in? What's going on?
So we had just moved to the city after my husband graduated medical school in Israel. And so we were living on the Upper West Side. And we decided that as soon as he graduated, we would like try to start getting pregnant. And nobody tells you how to get pregnant, to be honest. So I went to my OB, who I've seen since I was 18 years old. And I said, like, trying to get pregnant, I assume I need to get off my birth control. Like, how do I make this happen? And she was not helpful, to be honest. But I ended up seeing another OB who said, like, you have PCOS. So instead of trying to get pregnant for 6 months to a year, why don't we just start you on oral Clomid to help you ovulate, and then we'll see what happens. So it was a very proactive way to conceive my first. So we did 1 round of Clomid, like the lowest dose didn't work. And then we did the second dose, which is like 100 milligrams, and we got pregnant. So it was like a 2-month journey to getting pregnant. And even though we took the Clomid, it didn't feel so long because it was proactive. She said, like, you don't even have to try for 6 months before I give you this. So it was a pretty easy journey getting pregnant, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And how did that pregnancy go?
Uneventful. It was like my easiest pregnancy. Everything was good. Delivered at 38 weeks. My water broke in the middle of the night and went to the hospital. He was born 12 hours later, vaginally, and he was pretty big. He was 8'1", but overall, like, no complications, pretty seamless delivery and pregnancy.
Terrific. All right. So you're probably thinking a piece of cake. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Here we go. Easy peasy. No
Easy
problems.
Peasy.
All right. So take us through what happened with your next pregnancy.
So we decided when my son Noah turned 1, we'll start trying for another one. So again, we just went back to that same OB and she said, here's the Clomid, like, don't try again. You know it worked for you. And it was 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. It was like 6 months later, the Clomid wasn't working. We were very distraught because we were like, this had worked before. Like, what's different from now and a year and a half ago? So she told us she could put us on letrozole, which is another oral medication. We tried that for a few months, didn't work. And by the time we were like 8 months into this process, she recommended that we see an REI, so an infertility doctor. We went to RMA of New Jersey. That's where we were living at the time. And we had a consultation and they decided that it was probably because of the PCOS and that they would just wanted to do like 1 round of Clomid plus a trigger shot. And so we would have to, come in for observation and all that kind of stuff. So it was really scary, to be honest, to initially make that call to the REI. It's almost like you're admitting defeat, like something's not working and I need extra help. So we went with them and we were about to start the injection process and I got pregnant naturally. So we were super excited. I was over Passover. We were with my family in Florida and we took a pregnancy test in the morning. And I remember just like running into my parents' room and showing them because they knew we were trying to get pregnant. And so we were all so excited and things were pretty uneventful. I went for checkups. And at the time, since I had a consultation with RMA, I was still able to go there, even though I didn't do anything with them. So they gave me like ultrasounds twice a week. So it was very reassuring. And everything was great. They graduated me at 8 weeks to my regular OB. I went to him once, heard the heartbeat again. Everything was fine. I asked him if I could come back the following week since I was used to getting weekly ultrasounds and I have a history of anxiety. So I wanted to just like check up and make sure everything was going okay. So I went in at 9 weeks on my own accord and there was no heartbeat. I was by myself in the room with the OB and the nurse. And I remember him putting the ultrasound probe on me and not saying like anything. And then saying he had to check something. And then he did it one more time. And then he said, I'm so sorry, there's no heartbeat.
What was that like for you?
Awful, terrible. I was by myself and I remember it felt like I was in a dream, when something happens to you and you're kind of like, not really happening to me. So I immediately called my husband and he actually thought I was joking. Like he fully didn't understand that I was sitting in the office, like for real, this is happening. And so we went into the OB's office. I went in, my husband was on speaker and we were told either, you could wait it out, naturally miscarry, you could have a DNC or you could take a pill. In the end, we decided to do the DNC, which I think was the best option for us. But I have to wait 10 days in between finding out that information and when we could schedule the DNC. So sort of like walking around with a dead fetus or whatever you want to call it in my body for 10 days. Those were the worst 10 days ever. But the DNC was very straightforward. I joke only now that it was the best sleep of my life. And I'd like to get propofol every single night so I can sleep well. But it was an easy recovery. I didn't have any pain. I didn't have any bleeding after. Just emotionally, it was really tough for us.
Was it more the loss, or was it sort of like the defeat that you're not, so to speak, able to get pregnant? Do you know what I mean? The difference?
Yeah, totally.
Is it more the pain of looking back on what you lost, or sort of the pain oh my God, infertility or whatever, almost infertility, I guess you would call it, whatever. And now I'm still not pregnant. So what part it's obviously both, but which one dominated?
I think it was just not being able to get pregnant and admitting that okay, this didn't work after 9 months. We were about to start some kind of treatment process with RMA and now we're going to have to go back to them. I think that was the hardest part for me. And so we decided we're not going to wait. We're just going to go right back to RMA as soon as I was cleared to move on with the treatment. And then we actually got pregnant on our own again. So that pregnancy, and that was my second son, was awful in terms of mentally awful. Every single scan, I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. What's going to happen? Are we going to miscarry again? What are the percentages? I went down a whole rabbit hole of data and I continued to do the weekly ultrasounds, and we were just very, very cautious in the pregnancy. We didn't tell people until 20 weeks. We were just we didn't even want to talk about it amongst ourselves because we were so nervous of what's going to happen. And so that pregnancy overall was uneventful, I would say, until the delivery part. That was pretty eventful. Basically, when I was 36 weeks and 5 days, I woke up at night heavily bleeding. And we were actually at my in-laws' house over Passover. And we called the OB on call and they said, you need to come right away to the hospital, of course. So we drove to the hospital. It was 45 minutes from where we were. We got to the hospital, and at that point, I just assumed that I lost the baby since I was bleeding so much and I couldn't feel him moving. But we got into a hospital bed. We were hooked up to a fetal monitor and we heard the heartbeat. And that was the most amazing sound to hear in that moment because I really had no idea what the outcome would be there. And basically, it seemed like I had a placental abruption. So they told me that we need to induce you right away. This baby needs to come out. Otherwise, it can lose oxygen and the baby could die. Basically, they wanted to induce me, and they induced me, and the baby was not, there was no dilation whatsoever. And so I was sort of coerced into a C-section at the time. And so I ended up having a C-section about 12 hours after we got to the hospital. And the baby came out. He was 36 weeks and 5 days, but he was 7 pounds and 11 ounces. So it was a pretty big baby. He was healthy, thank God. We were worried he's kind of early, didn't need to have any further intervention, no NICU experience, thank God. But my recovery was really, really hard from the C-section. I think, again, physically, it was super hard. And I couldn't lift my son, who was almost 3 at the time. I couldn't drive for a few weeks. I couldn't cook because I couldn't lift the ingredients. I couldn't do anything basically. But mentally it was really hard because it was I had dreamed for this baby for a year and a half for so long. And then it was sort of ripped out of me. It felt such a different experience having a C-section versus a vaginal delivery. I felt I had no control over how the baby came out. And so I think mentally it was really, really tough too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, you used the term coerced for your C-section. So what do you mean by that? Like what was either what happened or what was the experience for you and how it happened?
So I went to a practice in New Jersey that's, I would say, looking back, they're pretty incompetent, and they were very pro C-section, meaning they don't do VBACs at this practice. They just like more err on the side of caution. So basically, after they had broken my water, the doctor was about to leave, and like 12 hours later, when there was no dilation, he said to me, like, I'm leaving for the night, so I think you should have a C-section because like my colleague's coming in the morning, and it happened to be a doctor like I didn't like in the practice. And he also was telling me that because they had broken my water, if I didn't deliver in like 24 hours or less, then their baby can get an infection and you would need to end up in the NICU. So it felt coerced in the sense that I felt like scared. Like, I don't want my baby to be in the NICU. First of all, he's premature. So that on top of the infection, it felt like I didn't have a choice in the moment. But looking back, I feel like I was pressured because like the doctor was like, hey, look, I can get this baby out in the next 20 minutes. Like from the time I made the decision to have the C-section, I think it was 18 minutes until the baby was born.
And so meaning it wasn't emergent, but you felt like they were recommending it maybe because it was just like the easier way to go or
Correct.
Something.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. That leaves a bad taste. I mean, I have no idea whether it's true or untrue, but that's what you're feeling, right? That's how it's presented to you.
Yeah.
And so that definitely leaves a bad taste.
I was also told it wasn't a placental abruption after all of that. So it was also like, it made me feel like, well, then why did I even do this C-section? Like I also did it partially because they were like, this baby needs to come out. Like, so the fact that they told me it wasn't a placental abruption, it made me like question why I ended up choosing the C-section in the end.
And so how did you afterwards, you're left with this sort of, you're recovering physically, which is quite unpleasant. And you're sort of like emotionally, mentally, you're also sort of like, it doesn't sit right with you. How do you process that? And at the same time, you have a beautiful baby, right? So it's sort of like it's like, these are very, sort of disparate thoughts at the same time.
Exactly. So that's when I was in therapy since my older son was about like 4 months old, just to deal with some anxiety, like postpartum anxiety. And so I spoke to my therapist about it. And that is actually when I decided to go into maternal mental health, because I was seeing a male therapist at the time. And no offense to you guys that are males, but he couldn't fully like understand the emotions that I was going through after this birth of my second son. And I just was trying to like find resources of like some people that went through C-sections, people that went through placental abruption, people that went through like quasi infertility. Cause I also felt like I was like not in one group or the other. Like I didn't really go through infertility, but I didn't have like this like natural experience. And I had this like 4 C-sections. So there were so many different emotions at play. And that's when I decided, and I was in social work school at the time. And that's when I decided like, I'm going to do this. There needs to be more resources for women out there.
Cool. And you think it was because he was male or because he just wasn't very good at it?
I think it was a combination because he was an excellent therapist I saw him for like almost 2 years. But I think there's just some things that like, if you don't have female body parts, it's sometimes harder to understand people. I'm not saying all the time, but
that's fair.
It was a combination. Yeah.
All right. And so after that, you're in therapy and you're deciding you're going to do this yourself. And you did decide to have more children. And what happened with the next pregnancy?
So I actually didn't decide to have more children.
No, it was decided for you. All right.
Yeah. Because it took us so long to have Caleb, who's our second. I said to my husband, I'm never going on birth control again. Like all my pregnancies were Clomid or letrozole or something. So he's like, okay, whatever. And so when Caleb was 4 months old, I was like, I've been peeing a lot lately. Like it's not normal for me. So I decided to take a pregnancy test thinking like, there is like no chance that this is going to be positive. And it was positive. And that was actually on Thanksgiving morning when we were going to my in-laws with my parents. So all the families were together. And so we told them the day that we found out, because we were just like in utter shock. Like our kid was 4 months old and everyone was like, they thought we were joking. Like I remember my father-in-law, he's like, you're shitting me, right? I'm like, no, we're serious. And at first I was like super grateful. Like, this is so cool. Like, this has never happened to me before. But then like the reality started to creep in. Like, I'm going to have kids like 14 or 15 months apart. Like, that's kind of crazy. But in the end, like I was grateful more, like the feeling I would say is more gratitude. And so we went back to that same OB who gave me the C-section, which I think was mistake number one.
I was gonna ask why you did that. If they left that bad, it was just you didn't really have time to decide because it sort of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. Like I feel like I didn't have like time to process or decide, like to see someone else. And to be honest, like where we're from in New Jersey, like nobody likes their OB around here. So I would ask around and everyone's like, you have to go to the city. And I just was like, how am I going to go to the city? Like I have a 3-year-old, like a 4-month-old, like, and I'm like in school and my husband's in residency. So he's never around. How am I going to like do this? So it didn't even like cross my head. And so I went back to that OB and he was like, everything's fine. We heard the heartbeat. At that time when I went in, I was about like 6 or 7 weeks pregnant. Again, I said, like, I want to come back every single week. And I did. I heard the heartbeat at 7 weeks. Around 8 weeks, I remember exactly where I was. I was in the nail salon and I went to the bathroom and I started spotting. And I was freaking out because I've had like 3 other pregnancies and I never spotted before. So I did call that OB and he told me on the phone that, oh, so many pregnant women spot and like you're spotting because you had a pap smear the day before when I went in for the exam. And I started to think to myself, like, I didn't have a pap smear. There's no way. Like you could feel when you have a pap smear. But I'm like, this is what the OB is telling me. Like he's probably right. So I said, I want to come in tomorrow just to like check. And he said, you came in yesterday and like there was a heartbeat. You're fine. Like very, very dismissive. And I said to him, I'm coming tomorrow, whether you like, I'm going to show up when the office open. And he said, like, be my guest.
You're like, so I'm the chef therapist. I'm coming in.
Like, I'm coming. I don't care that yesterday my scan was fine.
Yeah.
So I went in the next morning and I sat in the exam room and he finally came in and he did an ultrasound and he said, see, I told you everything's fine. And there was a heartbeat. And he said, I told you had a pap smear yesterday. And I said, I didn't. And there was a nurse in the room. And I said, can you check my chart? And she said, doctor, she didn't have a pap smear. So that's problem number one, I would say. And he was, again, like very dismissive. Like, I told you everything was fine. Like, have a good day. And like walked out of the room. And something just didn't like feel right, I would say. Like, and the spotting continued. And so that happened on a Wednesday, like that scan. And then by Friday, the spotting was like heavier. It was like more red in color. And I remember like texting my friend at the time who was also pregnant, who actually was at your practice, Dr. Fox. And she said to me, reach out to Dr. Fox, like, because she said, well, first reach out to your OB. So I reached out to my OB. I called the office and they wouldn't even put the doctor on call on the phone. They said to me, if you're bleeding and you're worried, just go to the ER, which I don't think was the right way to handle that situation at all. So I ended up calling you and I'll never forget the kindness. Like you didn't know me from anywhere. You knew like you're very good friends with my cousin, but like you didn't know me. I wasn't your patient. And I remember what you said to me on the phone. You said, listen, you could be having a miscarriage. You could not. I'm happy. I'm in the city right now. I'm happy to like, it was a Friday afternoon. You're like, I'm happy to stay here till like 5:30. If you can get here now, I'm happy to scan you. Like, don't worry about like the insurance. We'll figure it out later. Come if you want. And that kindness was like incredible to me because my own OB was so, so dismissive. And I remember saying like, I don't really want to schlep to the city, but like, that was so, so kind of you. So what ended up happening was the bleeding got heavier in the next couple of hours. And I told my husband, like, I'm going to the ER because I just didn't want to wait around till Monday to get a scan. I needed to like know the information. So I left the kids and it was Shabbat. So I drove on Shabbat, which I had never done before. And I went to the local hospital and they gave me an ultrasound. And by the time I was at the hospital, like there was no fetus even in the ultrasound. It had like passed or was about to pass. And the kind ER doctor said to me, like, I'm really sorry you miscarried. And it was horrible. Again, this one was worse because I was alone in the ER. They actually didn't even have a room for me. I was in the hallway. Oh. And he like sat down with me and said it in a very sweet way. But when he was talking to me, he got a phone call and he said, oh, your doctor's calling me, your OB. So I said, okay, wow, he's checking up. That's shocking. He checked up. The ER doctor told him your patient miscarried. And I never heard from him over the weekend. I never heard from him at all. But I did hear from you, Nadie. Again, I remember I texted you from the ER on a Friday night saying like, there's no heartbeat, there's no baby anymore. Thank you so much for your kindness. And you wrote me back like such a nice text. But the thing that I'll never forget is Saturday night after Shabbat, I had a call that said like no caller ID. So I assumed it's my OB's calling. He's a religious man, so he probably didn't want to call me on Shabbat, even though he had the information that I miscarried, but it was actually you calling to check in on me. And at that moment, I was like, I need to switch to you because the kindness that you showed and just like the compassion, like I'm not even your patient and my own OB can't call, he can't check up on me, nothing. And it actually got worse. So I actually went back to my OB on Monday for a scan to make sure like all the fetus was out. And he walked into the room and he said to me, so how are you doing? And I said, not good. And he said, no, I mean like physically, are you cramping? Are you bleeding still? Like what's going on physically for you? And at that moment, I was obviously like appalled, shocked, angry, hurt. I mean, I had been with this OB who did my D&C like a year and a half prior, who did my C-section, who knew I miscarried, who dismissed like my feelings all week before. And so I actually looked at him and I said, are you seriously asking me that? And he had no words to like respond. And I obviously did not go back there. And that was the end of that chapter, I would say.
Wow. Not a good interaction.
No.
What could I say? It's not good. I'm sorry I had to go through that.
Yeah.
It's tough, but I guess the only silver lining is that you and I got to spend a lot more time together.
Exactly. So I guess we could fast forward like a few more months. Again, I was like, I'm never going back on birth control. Not that I like wanted to have a kid right then and there, but I'm like, this natural pregnancy thing only happened to me once. And there's no way it's going to happen again. And I should say after that second miscarriage, I experienced, which is I never knew about, I experienced postpartum depression, even though I was pregnant, and postpartum depression can occur even if the pregnancy doesn't last, which I had no idea about, even though I was in social work school and learning. I didn't know this. And so I ended up going to a psychiatrist and I started Zoloft at the time. And it was so helpful because after that miscarriage, I just I could barely get out of bed. I mean, I was functioning like I was going to my internship. I was doing all the things, but I felt like somebody else was doing all the things. And I was just like this other identity, didn't feel connected to anything. I couldn't like bond so much with my children. I was not eating as much. My sleep was really bad. And so I decided like, I need to do something about this. So I started seeing a new therapist who was excellent. And I started the Zoloft. And so I was like, I wasn't thinking about having a third child. And then I unexpectedly got pregnant again. Twice.
Look
right?
at you. You turned into like the most fertile person ever.
That's what my husband says every time. He's like, you're so fertile. Because I never thought that would be me. So it's just interesting. And I remember calling you, Nadie, right away. I remember texting you, do you have time to talk? And you're like, yeah, I have like 5 minutes. Like, you're awesome. And I said to you, I'm pregnant and I want to be back. What do I do? And you said to me, if you want to be back, you have to leave the state of New Jersey. And I knew you were right, but there was like something that I'm like a fearful driver. I'm like, how am I going to like get to these appointments on the Upper East Side? Like, it's going to be such a to-do. What am I going to do? And then I just decided like, I have to. I want this VBAC more than anything. I want to be in a practice where I feel seen, where I feel heard, where there's doctors that are compassionate and also really good at their jobs. So I remember I came to see you like a week later. We had a consultation and you spent, I think, like an hour and a half with me and my husband, which is unbelievable. And at that moment, I was like, this is the right practice for me.
So when before we continue with this little infomercial you're doing for me in my practice, I do have to clarify my statement about the state of New Jersey.
Okay.
Because I don't want people to say like, Nady Fox thinks that there's no VBAC in the state of New Jersey. So that's not so I was saying for you, like you have to leave the state of New Jersey. I mean, there are definitely people who VBAC in New Jersey, and there's several wonderful hospitals in Jersey that do them. But I sort of knew where you were going, what that hospital's attitude was towards VBAC, where you were sort of emotionally, and you couldn't stay where you were. That was pretty clear. Like that's not really an option for you. And if you're going to switch, you're like, I'm like, you need to be like under our wings because we're going to, we're like, because we're going to do everything we can to make sure this happens. We got vested interest in you. Like this is something that you need to do. So I'm not disparaging the state of New Jersey. I live in the state of New Jersey. They've been wonderful to me. A lot of good medicine there, but you needed to leave the state of New Jersey. That was like,
correct.
It was the right thing for you. And listen, you're not a first-time mom, right? So you have 2 kids. You had it wasn't even the VBAC part, honestly. It was also like your last pregnancy prior to the miscarriage. It's like a big deal to start bleeding heavily at 36 weeks. And it wasn't just like, oh, this is someone who has 2 kids and wants to VBAC. This is like if you want to be labeled a high-risk pregnancy, you are. If you don't, you're at risk, whatever it is. But there's stuff going on that we got to follow closely. And I had confidence that we could do it. And I didn't want to just start randomly picking people that I didn't know elsewhere in Jersey that you're going to go to, because that would not have worked well, I think, for you. And then it wouldn't have worked well for me because I would have had to, we'd be talking anyways. So I was like, just come, like, we'll take care of it. And, your husband's in medicine. Like, it's like, this is, this can't be done differently. Is what I was thinking.
He was actually he was doing residency at Mount Sinai West at the time. And you guys were planning to switch to deliver at that hospital anyway. So we like saw it as like a sign also, because it was like, if anything happened, he can meet me at my appointments. He can come to the hospital. So it ended up like working out really, really well.
Perfect. So what I want to do is we've covered sort of who you are and your first 4 pregnancies, your 2 children, your 2 miscarriages. You're now at the very beginning of your 5th pregnancy, and you're going to start your journey in the big city. So what I want to do is we're going to put a bow on this here, and we're going to pick it up again next week with part 2 of your story, which is gaps in the big city, having a baby.
Perfect.
Thank you for listening to the Healthful Woman Podcast. To learn more about our podcast, please visit our website at www.healthfulwoman.com. That's HEALTHFULWOMAN.com. If you have any questions about this podcast or any other topic you would like us to address, please feel free to email us at hw@healthfulwoman.com. Have a great day. The information discussed in Healthful Woman is intended for educational uses only. It does not replace medical care from your physician. Healthful Woman is meant to expand your knowledge of women's health and does not replace ongoing care from your regular physician or gynecologist. We encourage you to speak with your doctor about specific diagnoses and treatment options for an effective treatment plan.